Noswaith, good evening, everyone, and welcome croeso to the next in our Theatr Clwyd in Conversation With series. I'm Tamara Harvey, I'm the artistic director, and I'm very, very proud and happy to welcome my friend and sometime colleague, Richard Schiff, to the screen this evening. Richard, press unmute, press screen. Hey, that's always the nerve-wracking moment. Hey,
Hi,
Resta.
how are you?
I'm all right. I am in Wales, which is at this moment a spectacularly happy nation because they just won the rugby.
Good for them.
Um, and you are in Canada, is that right?
Vancouver, yeah, Canada,
Um,
Northwest.
a- and first off, because we were going to do this pre-Christmas, and you got sick, so I feel like I should start by saying you all right.
Um, I feel like I'm in a World War II movie, and the nurse just came up to me and asked me, "Are you all right?" Um, I am all right. I'm very lucky compared to many stories that I've heard about the uh, the after effects of COVID, and some people aren't able to work for months and months afterwards. And it was a very scary episode, and I was in the hospital for 6 days, and it was touch and go actually for a minute. And so I feel very fortunate that I'm back to some semblance of normalcy.
Well, I'm quite glad you're all right.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I should explain for our audience. You and I met years and years and years ago at an awards. It wasn't even an award ceremony. It was a pre-award ceremony in London when you were doing Underneath the Lintel, the very beautiful one-man show that you did in the West End, and have worked together. So only once since.
Seems like we've prepared to work together many more times.
Failed
But
to achieve it.
once is when it worked out. Yeah.
But stayed in touch, and it's very lovely of you to do this because I've not yet managed to lure you to Theatr Clwyd, but thank you for joining us for this series. We've got a huge number of questions that people have already sent in, but I'm going to kick off by asking what was the moment when you thought this is something. What was the no, I'm going to go back even further. What was the moment when you fell in love with theatre? Because theatre was your first love, I think.
Yeah. I don't know if it was my first love, honestly, but I did fall for it. Um, and the question is, when did I first know that? Kind
Yeah.
of. I was, to jump right in, a kind of disturbed young person, and had a lot of, and it was very quiet, and I was very reclusive, even as a teenager. And I found myself going to certain films and certain plays because I lived in New York, grew up in New York, that put me in a trance. And the trance was such a relief from my life, if you will. And so it sounds a little too dramatic, more dramatic than it actually was. But I fell in love with the trance. So plays like The Comedians that Jonathan Pryce was in, that Mike Nichols directed. I found Mike Nichols' plays often put me in a trance, and his films. And films like The Graduate and Nashville, and later, of course, The Godfather and those movies, and Serpico. And I loved that feeling of forgetting about me and being taken on this wonderful journey. And wonderful or not, even if it was a difficult piece, I was taken on a ride, and I became fascinated with that. It wasn't like I saw Oklahoma on Broadway and I want to wear a cowboy hat and dance like those guys. That wasn't my thing.
Although
I hear,
I would pay good money to see that.
yeah, well, that might be worth $1 or $2 or £1 or $2. But I wasn't one of those look at me. And those actors are very valuable because they're much needed, and it leads to them gathering their talent together and going out on that journey. But that was not me at all. I was much more. It was much more scientific to me. Like, what is this that causes this trance to happen? And I tripped over acting program in college, and that's how that journey started. I was floundering.
It's the bit that I realized we did a few. We'd programmed a season last autumn and then weren't able to do it because of lockdown, and but live streamed a few, and as a member of staff I was allowed to sit in while the live stream was happening. And I realized the first one that I sat in, as I kind of sat in the front row and wept, actually, because just the being in a theatre, in our theatre again. But I realized that what I miss is the space that it gives when I'm sat in the dark watching a show, the headspace of that, that there's nothing else, there's just that and me, and even in those moments when I'm not caught up in the story, the kind of the air that it creates to think in different ways, and for your brain to do a different kind of thinking. That's the bit I think I've missed the most in this.
Yeah, and you were somewhat alone in the theater, or other than the people. Yeah, that's fascinating. The theater is just a magical space. I mean, I often, when I work in theater, which is never enough, get there at 4 in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon. Because it takes me many hours to warm up out my nerves, which is just the way that I am. But also I just love the feeling of, this is a space where something magical might happen sometime soon.
And do you get that backstage as well as on stage, or just?
Backstage is so unglamorous, but yes. And underneath the lintel, I was at the what was that theater called?
You were at the Duchess, weren't you?
The Duchess, of course. And I got a note the first day that we loaded into the theater, from an actor, and I'm sorry I don't remember his name because I didn't keep it. But it was a beautiful note welcoming me to London, and apologizing for the theater, because the architect was not a guy who did theater before. He was a very famous architect back in whatever century. And he built this beautiful theater, but he had forgotten about the dressing rooms. So they had to build a separate tower to attach itself to the building. So I was actually in prison in a tower, like 2 stories above, by myself with no other sound, because no one else was in the play. And then every night felt like a descent into the 7th level of hell to get to the theater. So, and then I do exercises, I do all these yoga things, and I do, and the dressing rooms were so tiny, but it had a sliding door between 2 of them. And I could lie on the threshold between the doors and lie down and do my exercises. So that's the glamour of the West End.
But there is something, I still, even when, the theatres are always unglamorous backstage, really, aren't they? Except maybe Bath Theatre Royal, which is kind of spectacular. But the first show I ever worked on, I was assistant director on a touring opera, and the first venue we went to was Canterbury. And as I walked through the stage door and walked into the green room, I called my mum and said, "I'm allowed in," because there's something so amazing about that, about being allowed behind, it's that thing, isn't it? Being allowed through the door marked private, being allowed behind the curtain.
That's very poetic. "I'm allowed in" is a great line, and to end a poem. about your life in theater. Yeah, yeah, it's and what's odd is when you go see a play and you go see the magic. I'm thinking of Hamilton because I was invited backstage, and of course a lot of that play was based on Lin Manuel's fanaticism over the West Wing, and they were all fans of me. So I felt very welcomed back there when I went back, and all of these guys, Chris Jackson and Leslie Odom Jr. and the good, wonderful guy that did play Jefferson in Lafayette, whose name just slipped my mind. But they were all there and acting like this was their home, and I was invited into their home, and I'm like, you guys are just acting like normal, and my life just changed out there. And you guys, they don't carry that experience the way I do, right? To them, it was another night in the theater. But there was one time, speaking of the magic of it, and I won't remember his name either, but I was in Moscow, and I was invited to. I interviewed this guy actually, who was a dissident, who ran a theater. He ran a theater, and it wasn't the Moscow Art, but it was a famous theater. My details are bad, and he told me in the interview, we talked a little bit about theater, was that he spends 300 nights a year on stage. Oh my God, for how long? Oh, 25, 30 years. So he invited me to see him in a play of all things called My Dinner with Stalin. And we go to the theater. I go to the theater. I was going with the person who I was there to witness his trial. To be honest, it was someone who was on trial in Moscow, and his ex-wife and I went to this play, and the owner, theater, actor, star, greeted us at the door and invited us in and asked us if we would like tea or coffee or a drink, and welcomed us to his home. When I'm doing a play, I don't want to know who's coming. I don't want to see the audience. You remember, I don't want to see the audience. I don't want to hear. I don't even know that there is a play out there. I just want to stay in here. And this guy was just the absolute polar opposite, and was literally welcoming into his living room. And he on stage was the most interesting, in that the most minute detail of his work was stunning and beautiful. He wasn't a large actor. He was specific. He was right. If Stanislavski were alive today, he would go, yeah, that guy, that's the guy. That's what I mean. I'm talking about him. And everything was so just delicate and lovely. And he played Stalin in the first half with a mustache and a wig, and then he took off the mustache and wig afterwards. And he invited me backstage afterwards, and we had a vodka. And I said, "What is the thing about the mustache and the wig?" It was in Russian, so I didn't quite. I followed the story, which is fascinating, a beautiful story actually. But he said, "Well, in the first act, it was Stalin, and in the second act, it was Stalin." In other words, it was was unpeeling the facade or the presentation of the man.
That's
and
amazing.
that was, but his attitude towards the building is what I'll never forget. He was it was a place of magic for him, and everyone should come.
We're spending a lot of time thinking about our building at the moment, because we're about to embark on a massive capital redevelopment, because it's falling down around our ears. And it's funny, we've been having conversations about the green room, and kind of thinking of it and talking of it as the company living room, and also thinking and talking about the dressing rooms, and about how you create spaces that are both open enough for people to bring themselves to them, but also have, I don't know, I kind of want them to feel like they have, like they're a bit like, you know, when you go on a boat and everything is really beautifully, cleverly kind of designed, so there are spaces for everything, and there's like surprise drawers, and there's little, I don't know, I think we'll probably end up with a mirror and some lights and a desk, but I like to dream.
I like, I have 7 different kinds of boats in my head now, but yeah, I do. I know what you
all right,
mean.
I'm really acutely aware that I'm going to get into so much trouble for not asking any of the questions that people have sent in. So I'm going to start doing those.
You mean there are other people involved in this conversation?
Apparently there are other people watching, but let's just continue to believe it's just you and me. So what inspired you? You kind of talked about this, but maybe not quite. What inspired you to take up acting as a career? Because you started out directing, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I've tripped, like I say, I tripped over a threshold at City College of New York, where I went back to school. I left for a while and was floundering, and took an acting class and found like, oh, people talk to you because they have to. It was just an acting class in a, theater program. And then this guy who was teaching the directing class. The directing class was teaching the acting class. And I did a scene, and he came up to me and he said, we have a professional theater program here, a training program for actors, the Davis Center for Performing Arts. And I said, no, I didn't know. And he said, you should audition. And I went, okay. And I did. My roommate, we lived on 92nd Street at the time, is a guy named Stephen Fetter, who was a great tennis player, a basketball player, and what was termed in those days, I don't know how offensive this is now, a theater fag, because he loved theater. And I got him a standing room only for a chorus line as his birthday gift, and he was thrilled. And we got the album, and he played it all day long. So I asked him, what should I do? I've been asked to audition. And he found his play by Jules Pfeiffer called Little Murders. Jules Pfeiffer was a great cartoonist, as well as I've since told the story to Hallie Pfeiffer, who's Jules Pfeiffer's daughter, and a wonderful playwright and actress. And I did this monologue for these 2 guys, and I was reading, and I was just reading it basically, and I didn't know what I was doing. And whenever they would laugh, and I would stop and look up, and like, I'm trying to read here, please don't do that. And I would continue. Anyway, this is going to be a long story, so I'm trying to shorten it. But after I was done, the other gentleman, who turns out to be a man named Earl Gister. Earl Gister was the president of the League of Training Programs of universities around the country, had stopped at City College from Carnegie Mellon on his way to run the Yale School of Drama for 15 years, happened to be the guy that I was auditioning for. And he said, why are you so nervous? Was his first question. And I said, because I've never done this before. I don't know what I'm doing. And he goes, well, why do you want to be an actor? And I said, I don't want to be an actor. And he said, well, this is a 3-year professional training program. What are you doing here? And I said, I don't really know. I write, and maybe it'll help that. Anyway, he became my mentor. He let me in the program. It was me and a bunch of people from the High School of Performing Arts who showed up in tights. And years later, I would sit in his office and smoke his Lucky Strikes, and I'd bring up a big tub of coffee, and we'd talk for hours, when he had time. And at one point, I just said, why the hell did you let me in this place? And he goes, good question. He goes, of all the years I've been doing this, and again, president of professional training, he went all around the country for all the schools and ran the auditions. He said, of all the years I've been doing this, I've never had anyone in the interview be so honest in their responses. And I said, and it's also because it was a new program and you didn't have enough people, right? And he goes, kind of that too. And that's how it started. But I didn't like it. I was terrified from it. I would work rarely because he never forced you to work. But I was fascinated again with that. What is it that these people do that brings me into a trance? And every now and then, someone would do a scene, and your sense of credulity, I guess. What do you call that? That what's suspended? Your
Disbelief.
yes, and you be taken in by this 19-year-old girl playing a mother in a Shaw play. You know what I mean? It's like, how did that happen? And anyway, I stayed with it for 3 years. Had some fascinating teachers, local teachers in Harlem. Robert Macbeth was one of my acting teachers. Reminds me of a swimming coach in high school named Mr. Cramp. Um, and Rhea Gaisner from the Open Theater, which is where Sam Shepard got his start and was a playwright, and all this great Howard, what's his name, is the great set designer. Herman Shumlin directed the original Inherit the Wind with Paul Muni on Broadway. The original, all of Lillian Hellman's plays originally, and The Grand Hotel in the 30s. This is how old I am. And he was 90 years old, a bald head and big eyes. And anyway, so I was just surrounded with these incredible New York artists who were teaching up there. But then I directed a play. I directed a couple of plays there that were I got a lot of feedback from, and I was very excited about. And I came out of college. My girlfriend at the time was auditioning for a play in Brooklyn. So I went, all right, I'll go. And it was Blues for Mr. Charlie, a play by James Baldwin. And I went and auditioned for one of the parts of White Town. There was White Town and Black Town. And this is actually a play based on the murder of Emmett Till, and that's all come back now. And I auditioned for this little part, and then they ended up giving me the lead role of the murderer, Lyle Britton Jr. And I did it in Fort Greene, a paying job in Fort Greene at the Masonic Temple in Brooklyn. And it was great. I got all these people said, join my company. I got all these nice, just wonderful responses from a community that should hate me. You know what I mean? I mean, I played the murderer of Emmett Till. Anyway, I had to get to the theater at noon in order to start my warm up so that I wouldn't have a heart attack at 7:30. And I realized if I continue acting, I'm going to die. So I gave it up, even though I had all this kind of success in my very first audition. And then went into directing and stage managing, which I was horrible at, but assistant directing and so on, and went on for years. And then I kept finding this one group of actors that were very easy to direct, and I was losing my touch. Not that I ever had any with my connection to what I wanted to create, like life on stage at any cost. And these actors had one teacher in common. And I called this man and I said, what is it that you do that makes your actors so good and so directable? And he said, you should come in and talk. And I went, okay. And I went in and talked with him. And then when we were done, he goes, you're an interesting fellow. You should take my class. I said, well, I don't want to be an actor. And he goes, you should take it anyway. Try it in the summer, and then if you like it, you can do the 2-year program. And that guy was William Esper, who became the America's master teacher from the neighborhood playhouse and so on. And anyway, 2 years of acting, and I kept saying, I don't want to do this. And he kept saying, you can do this. And at the end of that program, I totally committed to this one role. And that's when I kind of understood what acting was about. Is that you have to put everything into it. I was just doing the exercises up to then, I'm not an actor. I'm just doing it to learn. And then because he challenged me. He said, you won't get this, but try it anyway. It's good for you. And then I went, fuck you. I won't get this. Excuse my French. And then I dove in, my partner, Robin Lord, who I was in love with, it was a Shaw play. And I said, she had done a lot of Shaw. I said, teach me everything, and I was just angry. And so I did it all. And I went, oh. And then we produced a play, and I had a lead role in this comedy, and it was a big hit. And then we took it off Broadway, and that's how it started. And I caught the bug. But I'm still, when I go to the theater, uh, it's not 12 noon, but it's soon after that. I still have to go really early, much earlier than most, in
Well,
order to
that's
be
one of
comfortable.
the, so Beatrice has asked, do you
That was a
consider
long answer.
yourself,
I'll try to shorten them a little bit. Sorry, go ahead.
nah, sod it, it's all right, we've got another 34 minutes. Beatrice, we've got time for one more question. Beatrice says, do you consider yourself a superstitious actor? If yes, do you have any particular rituals you follow while getting ready to go on stage or on set?
Well, I haven't changed my underwear since 2000, and like athletes, the athletes will not change their socks if they hit 3 home runs in a day. I would say that I am superstitious. I like to do a ritual. I like to do it in the same order. I like to get to the theater at 4 o'clock, for instance. Not so much on film
I
and
was going to say,
TV.
is it the same when you're filming or not so much? I mean, it would be difficult.
No, I've done so many more hours filming at this point, on set, and I know how to control the environment. I don't know how to control how I'm going to feel in front of 1,000 people, but I
Mm.
know how I can control the environment of the set, and I can ask people to move if they're in my way. I can ask for a rehearsal, another rehearsal. I could ask for writing to talk to the writers. I could ask for. I have a lot of power now, I suppose. I don't know if that's the right word, but even when I was younger, I would always challenge things that didn't feel right. And in theater, you kind of, once you're going up there, it's up to you, 100%. And you want to make sure that you're mentally, I carry a lot of demons. I'm probably, if you were going to paint me, it would be Pigpen. And all around here are all these demons that are swimming around my head, and I have to, talk to them and shut them up so that I can do my work. They're very quiet. They're in my trailer asleep, on film sets. I put them to sleep. They're done. But in theater, because it has to do with the social anxiety that I probably grew up with, my inability to connect with people that were alive. um, probably, I mean, I'm getting analytical, but I'm guessing that that's what everyone has that anxiety, right? There's very few people. And John Malkovich, I once asked about if he was, nervous, and he said no.
Bastard.
Yeah, and it makes sense. You look at his work; it's like, yeah, no, that's utterly empty of any fear. What he does in this world is not concerned about how anyone else is going to react, right?
But there's an interesting question from Edward here that says you just finished working on the West Wing before coming to London to work on Underneath the Lintel. Did you find the discipline of moving from TV back to theatre a challenge?
Oh yeah. Probably no more project in working in front of a camera was more challenging than the West Wing. So it wasn't like there was a lack of discipline. We had to learn 7 or 8 pages the night before and be ready. And it was like a play. All those walk and talks and all those were very much live. You couldn't drop the ball because then you'd have to start all over again. Um, and I used to get up an hour before call time or an hour and a half before call and work out, and before I had to leave. And even for an 18-hour day, so I'd make it a 20-hour day, and I'd have the energy to maintain myself throughout this very long process. And at 4 in the morning, I was the only one that was going, "What do you mean we're wrapped? Let's do this. Let's do another one." But so I had discipline, but going to theater, and sadly, I didn't have enough experience because of, in my 20s, I was directing plays, and then I started acting in plays, and next thing I know, I'm in LA, and I'm, not acting in as many plays. I only did 8 or 9 plays before I went to the West End with a one-man show. And I didn't quite know how to do that, in terms of what to focus on as in for your discipline. Obviously, I had to open up my voice, and I had to work out a lot and do a lot of yoga so that I would be flexible and I could get through this 90, 100 minutes on stage alone, speaking the whole time. But uh, I was probably the most disciplined I've ever been, and the best shape I've ever gotten into. And but I don't know, had I had the experience like British actors grow up doing so many plays so often, that I would have needed to be so concentrated in uh, in in my preparation, and that's where the superstition comes in, because it was like, if I don't do this just right, this worked last night, you know, and I would have I smoked back then, and I would have one cigarette, and if I didn't have a cigarette with the stage manager Howard
Oh, wow.
outside at 3:30 in the 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then everything was off, you know. So yes, it was very different, but it wasn't coming from a place of not having discipline before. Just different.
Um, all right. All right. We get it. You worked hard on the West Wing. 20-hour days though, Richard. That is, someone asked actually about, I'm going to find it there. You'll be astonished to hear there are a few West Wing questions, but I know from having spent time with you that you're okay with that. So I'm going to dive
Mm.
into them. Adam is asking, did you enjoy the famous walking fast dialogue scenes in the West Wing? And was there ever one that you really struggled with?
We all struggled with one or another. The ones that were the hardest, um, they weren't the hardest, but they were the most prone to failure. Let's put it that way. Was I remember this one time, uh, there was a very, very long walk and talk. That was probably 2 minutes or more, which is a lot of film time. But I wasn't in the walk and talk. I was in CJ and Alice and Janney's office. And then the walk and talk parades into that office, and then I have a couple of lines. And walk and talk sometimes, especially if it's a different director, will take many, many takes of rehearsals um, and takes to actually get it right, because the camera guy's going backwards. He's got a guy pulling him. He might bang on something, and then you got to cut, and then or someone drops a line, or it's usually technical, because we were so good at learning that we all had assistants, and we were running lines all the time, and we would rehearse and so on. But at one point, it was taking them so long that Allison and I just got into banter, and we were just having a shit ton of, excuse me, a bunch of fun, just hanging out. So we were just hanging out. And then I noticed that the walk and talk was getting louder and louder and louder. And I turned to her and said, "Oh my God, what's my line?" She goes, "I don't know." It had been like an hour and a half since we had to say them out loud, and they weren't important. They were just lines. Not that lines are not important, but they're not the kind that when you don't have a lot to do, sometimes that's harder to learn, because it doesn't stick to your ribs, and you don't practice it a lot, right? So they came in, and it just came to me like lucky that, but it was the panic of, you don't want to mess it up. I mean, we had walk and talks where we covered 3 different stories. A famous one, which is kind of the Scorsese kitchen version of West Wing version of the Goodfellas shot, very clearly an homage to that. And it covered 3 different stories, and I kept coming in and out with Bartlett, president, with these 3 different segments of conversations. So you had to choreograph that, and then we would go downstairs through the kitchen. The flame of the stovetop would flare, and then we go through this hallway and into cars and take off. That was all one shot. So there's a pen, and the one that they used, I saw recently, and I saw the panic in my face as I skipped a beat and then covered it, so that no one else will notice it because it was a Toby cover. But I saw that. Oh, I was panicking. I was panicking right there. So they were hard, but so much fun, and we were all theater people and loved it because it felt like we were live. It felt like we were doing a real, you know, you had to get it done, and there was that pressure.
So Nicola has asked, and you and I have spoken about this before, how much of you is, well, we haven't spoken about it from this angle. You've talked a bit about Aaron Sorkin and how he's a bit of a magpie in terms of people and characters, as I guess all writers are. But Nicola's asking how much of you is in Toby in The West Wing, and she says, bless, she says, please tell me you are not that sad.
Well, let's put it this way. I have to understand that sad in order to play that sad. And I'll leave it at that. But any great television writer has got to steal from what's in front of them to write 22 hours of television in 1 year. Not that he wrote every word, but first year he wrote 44 hours of television because he also had Sports Night on. And I think he had a little help, so to speak. Other people would write scripts and he would go in and Sorkinese them. But so he drew from me. Let's put it, I mean, it's common knowledge now because I've been asked before, but the other person who was very seriously asked, seriously considered to be Toby was Eugene Levy, who is a comic actor, brilliant comic actor. And so if they were thinking about him in that role, and I found out, no, they were very seriously, it was very close between us two. Then it was two different, it was a fork. And I say, whatever I say, but I'm complaining to the steward, what do you call it, flight attendant, that this thing could be, you're telling me to shut down something that can flummox. I remember the word flummox, but it was a great monologue that was written that morning. So I had to learn it. I taped it up on the computer I was working on. And then I realized I can't read this thing. I got to learn it. And somehow it just happened. I did quite a few takes in order, but he had written that that morning. So he was inspired by some element of Richard that is not very patient with ineptitude and stupidity. And so it evolved, that character evolved. And he, the very famous episode that I think fans have voted their favorite, one of their favorites is In Excelsis Deo, which was the first year. And it was an Emmy award winning episode for me and some others as well. And for Aaron. And that episode was not written for me. It was written by a playwright whose name skips my mind at the moment. Very wonderful playwright who's had a very successful television career. But I was very upset when I read that script. I was beside myself because it didn't capture who Toby was. And Tommy Schlamme, who runs the show, came up to me and heard that I was upset, and I started crying because I was so upset. And then Aaron came up and he said, "We'll fix it. We'll fix it. We'll fix it. I get it. We'll fix it." Then later I found out that it was written for Rob Lowe. It was written for that character, and it had that perspective. And I said to Tommy, is this what America thinks of Toby? It was completely backwards. And because of that, we created a perspective for that episode that was award winning. It was, and I think he learned a lot, Aaron did, about me from my reaction to that script. And so was there sadness? There was the deep hurt at somebody portraying this character that I'd worked so hard with in that light. Found out later it wasn't his fault. He was writing for another character, right? But I was deeply, deeply hurt, and he saw that, and that led to, I think, an evolution of a deep sadness for that character and other things.
There's a kind of question about the rhythms of Toby's speech, and then I'll move us on. But again, you and I have spoken about this. The rhythms of Toby Ziegler's speech are distinct from the other characters in The West Wing, says Simon.
Hey, Simon.
Do not speech during his, I'm not emphasizing it as you would, speech during his chess game with the president are typical. Was this something that you developed? Was it specified in the scripts, or should the directors take credit? And then he adds, our family are currently rewatching the whole series during lockdown, and the summit at Camp David is about to start. It's a good one. But the rhythms of speech.
So many memories whenever somebody mentions anything, and the summit was when John Spencer, as character Leo, has a heart attack, and I'll never forget how he played the leading up to that. It was so brilliant, and of course, real life imitated art. But what was the question?
About the rhythms of speech.
The rhythm.
Well, whether it was, it's basically saying, was it you? Was it the scripts? Was it the directors?
Yeah, well, if you notice, the other characters, other actors had a very different rhythm, and I was very aware of the ensemble and what I thought the ensemble needed. I've spoken about this. I've looked at it like a symphony, and I think which Aaron was very pleased to hear me say that, and that there were violins, and there were cellos, and there were flutes, and people would talk about how they ride the top of Aaron's language. Some of the actors in the show, when we were interviewed, said, I don't do that. I don't ride on top. The instrument that I thought of to fit into the symphony was a bassoon, because a bassoon is an instrument you don't even know is there until everyone else shuts up for a minute. And then you realize it's been playing this beautiful thing all this time. And but the rhythms, right? Well, underneath, and I think another reason why Aaron developed this complexity for Toby, and deep emotion, sadness being one of them, and loyalty and all those things, is because I saw those things in his writing. Aaron is not a simple man. He's a very complex person that comes from some severe pain, I'm guessing. I don't know much about him. We don't talk about that stuff, but I see it in his writing. His writing is so amazing. It does have this fantastic rhythm to it that you can easily just do that. But I wanted to search for the tendrils underneath, and yank at them and see what happens. And I think that's why Aaron wrote some of the darker stuff for Toby, because that's what I was searching for. I was looking for that, and the rhythms of the humor I found easy, and so I was slower than other people. I took my time with his language. I didn't find Jeff. Jeff, oh my God, Jeff, who played, who was in the play To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh, Goldblum. No?
No.
Jeff, Bridges.
No, I got the wrong. It's not Jeff. It's somebody
No,
else.
it's not. It's I'm going to look it up.
Out of my head. Circle rep actor. Anyway, He was on Network. You just look up Network. He was the lead actor in Network. I can't believe I don't remember his name. And after seeing To Kill a Mockingbird on Broadway, and I went back and I said hello, and he was like, he was so happy to see me. We weren't really good friends. What's his name? Did you just find it? Jeff Daniels. And we talked for an hour about how other actors would would not be able to find what Aaron was really doing. You know what I mean? And he was like, he studied me. He told me he studied me because it was he saw what I was doing, and he wanted to do that with Network. And then of course it's so easy to do for Kill a Mockingbird. And he's such a wonderful actor. It was one of the great compliments that I think I've ever heard from anyone, was that he studied me to learn how to handle a certain writer, which is kind of awesome. So the different rhythms are great. And you see Shakespeare, and you said the guys that find their own rhythm and aren't panicked by the language to write it and to make sure it comes out right. Mark Rylance, for instance, is that's when you go, oh, this is coming to life now, and too many. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, one of the things I love best about our conversations, it always is that you remind me that it's okay to be serious about what we do. I have a tendency, I think, always to, you'll be amazed to hear this, I have a tendency to default to the flippant. But I guess
another sorry, but another not line for a poem. To fall to the flippant.
A Life in the Theatre by Tamara Harvey. But I think I have a certain embarrassment a lot of the time about talking with any seriousness about what it is that we do in theatre and in telling stories in whatever medium. And I always love the seriousness and the fullness with which you approach it. Talking of glorious compliments, I have to make sure that we get this in because we only have 12 minutes left. But Anna has said, this is not a question, just a thank you. Toby Ziegler is the reason that I work in public service today. So thank you for that performance.
I'm so sorry for you. I'm so sorry that that you now are working for no money and sacrificing all your hours to help other people.
Stop it.
I owe you a dinner.
All right. I'm gonna move us on to a couple of other things. Gareth is saying you are in the Hudsucker Proxy, directed by the Coen brothers. They are known for being very specific with their dialogue, with little room for improvisation or deviation from the text. Is that frustrating for an actor?
Well, Coen brothers crack me up. I audition for every movie that, and they go, that's him. And then I don't get the part. They gave me, I think, as a bone, a little tiny role in Hudsucker Proxy. And maybe because I was working with Tim Robbins, I was in his theater company. I don't think that was why, but I think they liked me. They gave me this little role, and who knows what it would turn into, so it was in Wilmington, North Carolina. And it ended up being like one line. So I didn't have that issue. Not only that, but the take that they used was wide. It was in a mail room, as I recall. And I was blocked when I spoke. And they looped my line because they used to have to pay actors to come in to loop your line if it was muddled for some reason. And there was a lot of noise in that place. So of course they were getting people to do looping. And they didn't need me because you couldn't even see that it was me that was talking. So somebody else looped that line. So I can't really speak to the issue that Gareth brought up here.
That's so brilliant. I'm gonna ask you this one because it's a question being asked by a very wonderful actor called Michael Geary, who was has been in a couple of my plays recently, and I should get you and him in a rehearsal room together because it would just be utterly joyous. But he says there are a lot of reboots happening at the moment. How would you feel about revisiting a character that you've played before? And of course, you did that for a tiny bit for the election, but I guess more generally, how would you feel about revisiting a character you've played before?
It was funny when we did the special Hartsfield Landing episode of The West Wing. We all fell back into it quite easily, but I had a little bit different take than when I originally did it, and I liked that. I liked that there was another point of view. Same words, same things have to happen in the scene, but a much different point of view to that moment, largely having to do with the election, the current election. So you bring a whole nother perspective. I I would I don't think a reboot of The West Wing is a very good idea because you can't capture that lightning in a bottle again. A and B, we're all, it would look ridiculous to have a bunch of gray-haired, bent-over people in the White House running things. But it doesn't mean that they can't have a new administration and do something else. But I do love the idea. I did have this idea that Toby would come back, and don't forget he had this horrible finish on the show that I always hated. But he would come back and to seek retribution and it would be in small town politics or at least state level politics, and he would exact revenge politically on someone by supporting his opponent, and it would be that kind of political ground fight, and as opposed to making decisions on whether India and Pakistan, will stand down, but more about the people in little towns that are affected by nefarious interests and messaging that alters the truth. That is interesting to me to do Toby that way. Not a whole lot of TV characters. I mean, Barry from Relativity is my favorite role of all time. I can't imagine that he'd still be alive. I love that character though. And there were others that were fun. I mean, I'd go back and play the character on Ballers anytime if they wanted to make a movie out of that. I love that. That was just so much fun. So yeah, I would be open to it. And the difference in perspective that you bring after time off from something like that is always interesting.
So here's the flip of that in a way. Chantal has asked, are there any roles you've passed on doing but later looked back on and wish you'd done?
No. No, I've been very lucky that way. I was offered a very iconic Shakespearean role at the Royal, what do you call them?
Royal Shakespeare Company.
Yeah, them. And I was in a severe debate with myself, which you partook in. And I had just come off a not so great experience in theater and needed a break from it. And that, and it's 7 months in Stratford, and my daughter was still, I think, 15, and I didn't want to spend that much time. And the determining factor was that I asked the Royal Shakespeare Company, can my daughter work in the theater? Because I had just done a summer theater in the Berkshires, and she was able to work and had a fantastic summer. And and they said, sure, no problem. And then they got back to me and said, oh, she has to be 16 in England. So I said, I can't bring my daughter and my family to Stratford with them having nothing to, occupy their time except, hanging out with me. Anyway, that was the reason but I would love to do that play. And so I'm looking directly into your eyes and telling you that that particular play, I won't mention what it is, but that particular.
I know what it is.
I know you do.
You got a deal. We've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask you just to be patient for a moment while I look directly in camera and say, this is an In Conversation With hosted by Theatr Clwyd. I suspect more than with most of these, we've got lots of people watching who don't know our theatre at all. So feel free to ignore me while I say this, but we're doing okay at the moment. We are hanging in there. Our doors aren't open, but we're doing lots of work with our communities. We're doing lots of work online. The thing that we are acutely aware of, as indeed everyone who works in theatre across the UK is aware of at the moment, is that our freelance workforce, which makes up about 70% of theatre makers in the UK, are having the hardest time of it. So all of the actors you see on our stages, the creatives, the directors, the designers, the backstage crew, the dressers, a lot of them have fallen through the fairly paltry nets that have been offered and are really struggling. We had a fundraising campaign last autumn to raise money for micro bursaries for freelancers, because our wider freelance family had said the thing that they really needed was just the time and the space to be creative. So we gave out 108 micro bursaries, just a week's wage, for people to do whatever they needed to do to remember who they were and what made their heart beat. We are continuing to try and support freelancers by creating work. And this evening is free. It would be amazing if you felt able to give something to Theatr Clwyd to allow us to keep employing and working with as many freelancers as we possibly can. Don't press donate on the page yet, because if you do, it will take you off of this. And I'm going to ask Richard another question. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for listening to that. I'm gonna end with a future thing, which is how Stuart is asking, how do you choose your next project? I don't know if he means your next project as in general, how do you choose a next project, or how do you choose your next project now? You can take it how you will.
It's always tough. It's always tough to make a decision, especially for me. I like short projects because it doesn't change your life completely. You know, I like doing movies for 3 months or 2 months, or this TV show only has 6 episodes. But you know, for instance, this TV show that I'm doing requires me to move to another country, and it's been going on for a while now. You know. So my next project, I think I'll be done with this sometime soon. And my next project, I'm hoping I can go back to do theater. And one of the benefits of doing TV is that you're lucky in that you don't have to sing for your supper the next day. You have a little luxury to do things that you really want to do. So, but in fact, I also think of this job as a kind of retirement job. Because it's a way to get a nest egg. But I'm also now focusing very much on writing, and I'm writing what is now becoming a book. And I'm very excited that I finally had the discipline to sit down and do this thing which I know I'm good at, and I have a thing to say or two. And that's really exciting. So maybe I will just move to a cottage in France and bring my typer here, my little computer, and drink wine and start smoking again and write.
Well, I mean, that sounds perfect, because the flights from France to Wales are really quick. So, you know, you could just hop over, do a play whenever you wanted. Richard, we've taken an hour of your time. Thank you so much for giving it. Stay on here after I say goodbye to these people, because then I can just get to say goodbye to you for a moment without everyone looking. But thank you, diolch yn fawr, to all of you who've watched tonight. And thank you not just for watching tonight, but for continuing to support theatres. It means the world that you are still out there, still believing in us, while we continue to fight for the moment when we get to welcome you all back through our doors. Richard Schiff, you are one of my favorite actors, but more than that, you are one of my favorite people. So it has been a joy and a privilege to have you with us tonight. Thank you.
I'm so honored and grateful to get the chance to talk to you for this long, and to say hi to everybody over there.